Testing 1, 2, 3. Oh, that would be helpful, huh? Sorry about that, my friend. Okay, still confidence level is not rising. You never laugh. You never have any fun.
I understand, Gales.
See?
Taste.
See? Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
I loved Hollywood.
She's all excited about her Facebook Live today.
Sixth grade. Swim camp. I love that. That just came up. I was in North Carolina swim camp. Oh my God.
They're gonna put me out there.
Sorry. My favorite book was Get Down.
Here's the list you have to put your
I'm just I'm just nervous.
She's already, she's seen it.
Why are they gonna talk about you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I just have to tell you, that was life-changing for me when I went to swim camp.
These new ideas, I'm gonna have to do more, so, but I like it.
It was awesome.
How you doing?
I'm sorry, I did too. I did that, I'm sorry.
Better than not, isn't it?
Where are y'all?
Just fine.
Of the same.
Oh, yeah.
Get that read?
So she's gonna give us a report this morning.
I just read my sections, and I'm hoping that you
That's
just
what
read
I
your
did.
sections.
That's what I did
So I've
too.
seen on,
You don't have to worry.
Yeah, it's
That's what I was doing when I could actually run 5 miles. That's who I was listening to.
my granny used to say, put on some lipstick and get with it. So, I still don't see that I need to get refreshed without lipstick. And I haven't even refreshed, but I mean, if I go to his house, then I make sure everything's fixed before I go in. That was their thing, you gotta get up, get dressed, and go do your thing. No whining.
All right.
Wow.
All right. We'll go ahead and call the May meeting of the ESSA Steering Committee to order. Commissioner Key couldn't be here this morning, so y'all are stuck with me today. But hopefully we'll have a good day. Thank y'all for being here this morning. I know school is winding down and everyone is busy and trying to wind things up for the year. And I know sometimes that's a hardship getting here, but we appreciate you coming today. So thank you. Our first order of business is the consent agenda, the minutes. Does anyone have questions or comments about the minutes from last month? Take a motion to approve then.
So move. I second.
All right. Senator English and made the motion, and Ms. Flowers made the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion approved. All right, our first action agenda, Dr. Arola is going to talk to us about the modeling of the data. She was going to take some of the data that we have previously gotten from student data and see how some of our decisions that we would make would impact our students and schools in the state. So, Dr. Arola, if you're ready. Good morning.
All right. I'm going to start with that PowerPoint. There's just something about when you see yourself on a big screen and you just turn that thing away.
Yeah.
Quickly. Our office worked with the leadership team to try to bring some of the ideas that were coming in from stakeholders to life with the actual data. And so what I'm going to present to you is really a brief overview of it, because so much of it has been embedded into the draft that got published on Monday. And I'm kind of giving you my strategy, because there's so much that we had to run. And most of that is embedded into the draft. So what I'm going to show you are some things that I think are the hot points for questions and concerns, and try to put those in a deeper context and also try to get a sense from you all whether or not the writing of the information in the draft communicated what I'm sharing with you well enough. That'll help us to know what we need to update or strengthen or maybe reframe if it's not framed well enough. So I'm going to start with what I think is probably, to me, the most important thing, and that is you've gotten the updated theory of action, and the premise that this entire plan is built around is this idea that accountability is not an isolated thing, that it's really part of a larger system of support. And the purpose that we're trying to put around accountability is that it's going to help us understand where support is needed. And that premise is so critical. That's why that theory of action is so detailed. That's why you have visuals in there that we hope communicate the message more simply. Then, mindful of our peer reviewers that will be looking at this, I have it under authority, I'm sure Tina as well, when we went to the last Critical Friends meeting. There are the official peer reviewers of the ESSA plans, but then there are a lot of other groups that will be doing unofficial peer reviews and putting a lot of information out, and they've done that on the first set of states that have published their plans. So mindful of all the different audiences that we're going to get, I'm hoping that that theory of action really communicates this idea that this is about identification for support, index the annual meaningful differentiation, the school performance rating that's talked about in the accountability section. The idea behind that is the index. That's the system for differentiating among schools. And it has many more indicators than just achievement. And I'll talk a little bit about those and the weighting of those in just a minute. That school performance rating will help us to understand which schools have the greatest need for support. Those would be schools that would need comprehensive, or not, those are the districts, that the schools that would need comprehensive support, those are the LEAs or the districts that the department would be focusing on for that largest level of support, or more, try not to use words that can be confusing. And then also, we would use that annual school performance rating, that index, for meaningful differentiation of subgroups as well, or student groups. And you would see a report on all of the components. It would not just be the overall score, but you would see the score for each of the different indicators within the index. And that would be accompanied by other information. I want to connect that support for local systems. Hopefully in the theory of action you've seen the idea is that the districts are the front line, that they're the ones who have more support, control, resources to impact their struggling schools. They affect transitions, they affect grade ranges, everything within the district. We can't help struggling schools without the district being the major partner in this work. And the idea that we can do this through an evidence-based method, which is this plan, do, check cycle. If you've ever read, some people who know of him and don't just are in revering of him, but Anthony Brike, or Tony Brike as some call him, has an incredible resource out about learning to improve. and it's improvement science around how in education can we really improve our local systems. And it's by having these very rapid plan, do, check cycles. And what they're finding is the evidence is stacking up that this is one of the most phenomenal ways that you can really impact change in the areas where you most need it. That becomes part of this other piece that is this enhanced reporting. And the enhanced reporting, this mock-up that you see here, would be a front-facing to the deeper system that you see in My School Info, where you can go and ask just about any question and connect all kinds of factors to all this rich data that the state has that's now available through My School Info. There would be a front-facing piece that would give you the real critical components that are part of this support and accountability system. And I do want to point out, and I am curious from you all, since you have had to read the draft for today, on the left-hand side of this mock-up, you see the indicator scores: achievement, growth, graduation rate, English learner progress, and the school quality student success indicator. We would be reporting on the overall at the top, and then we would report on each indicator. We would do that for all students and for each subgroup. The middle little chart where it says subgroups, you would be able to see whether or not subgroups within the school are performing at, below, or we would color code to make it easier for the public to understand how are these other student groups doing relative to the overall population in the school. So information on every indicator, information for every student group. And then to the right, you see reporting about progress toward long-term goals. So the left-hand side of this report would be about the index, the school performance rating. And that's the piece where we would use all 5 of those indicators together to annually meaningfully differentiate among schools. The piece on the right is a way for you to have deeper information about our aspirational goals, what we want for all students. The vision is that all students will be prepared for college, career, and community engagement. And ESSA requires that states set long-term goals and measurements of interim progress. If you remember, under No Child Left Behind, we focused very heavily on small changes year to year, on students who just jumped over the proficient line. And in doing that, we shortchanged long-term learning. If we really want this to be different, if we really want this to focus on long-term learning, then we can't focus on just a single goal of percent students meeting the grade level cut point. We really have to focus on all students improving over time. So that's why the emphasis and the differentiation will occur on the index, which has a robust set of multiple indicators. And then we would have information for schools to gauge progress on those aspirational goals of all students being ready. And that was what you would see on the right-hand side. And if I'm not going to get to build this, but if I were having fun building this, then every single one of these little charts would be clickable. And when you click on it, you would go to the deeper information. You'd get to see information at grade level. You'd get to see information over time. You'd get to see charts that are very intuitive about trends and patterns. And then if you had more questions like, who looks like me? That's where you really get into the depth of My School Info. And you start to find schools that look like you, and you get to do some comparisons. So this would, again, this is just a general idea of what it could look like to communicate that theory of action and to put in their rightful place kind of the different components and how they're theorized to help us understand what's going on with our struggling, with all of our schools, and in particular to help inform us with our struggling schools. Question, Kelly?
Yes. On these reports, are these reports for the public or for the school?
Yes and yes. They haven't, so this is just a beginning mock-up to get reflection from stakeholders. So, this is going out for public comment. I imagine people will have a lot of different things to say. One of my coworkers, who's a former school administrator, just went, oh, I would love to have all that information.
Right,
A
but there's-
parent might feel a little differently.
We
Yeah.
wouldn't understand a lot of what's on that.
Right.
It's not explained in how it's set up,
Mm-hmm.
and it may be because that stuff's not complete yet.
Exactly.
All that information is not done.
Right.
As a parent who's not in an education background, we have to have more explanation of what's going on that chart. We can't read it, especially like there's the little spatter chart. It's
Sure.
pretty, but that's all I could tell you about it, is that it's pretty. It's got pretty
Yeah.
colors. I don't know what it means, and I'm going to have to gloss over some of that information. So there's going to be, if it's meant for parents to look at, to really make decisions about their schools and things like that, then we need to have a lot more comprehensive information on what it means.
In my mind, I immediately go to thinking about what helps me when I'm trying to understand something that's subject matter that I'm not familiar with. And I am a fan of a quick right click to a video that talks me through something and helps me to understand that. And the visuals themselves are, again, draft, and then how those visuals are communicated is another piece. And how we share that information with our general public, with our parents, again, is another critical piece. So this is a mock-up. It's a start. I say we find out what people think and we go from there. So I appreciate those comments, because that's, I'm way too deep in this to to know. But that is, I mean, the law actually says that we want parents to help us understand that. And so it could be that that's layer 2. You know, there could be a layer 1 that is much more simplistic for parents.
And there's one more, the very bottom one, school quality, and I know you have to put it that way. School quality from the government and school quality for a parent are two extremely different
Right,
things. And so there might need to be some more explanation on that one specifically, because as a parent, it's what's going on in the school, you know, are we having parent nights, are we having all these other things, as opposed to what the government is actually calling school quality. So
Amen.
just, I think we definitely need a definition for what that means, so the parents don't misconstrue
Sure.
what it means.
Yes, and actually, that's coming up. I'm getting to that. Other thoughts before we move off the visual?
I think Anthony had a question.
Yeah, I just had a quick question about students who fit into multiple subgroups. How would they be represented in the?
They're in each subgroup that they belong to. That's the
Okay.
law.
All right.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's something that we've tangled with since No Child Left Behind. That was one of the major concerns under No Child Left Behind, was if my student is an English learner, my student is economically disadvantaged, and they also happen to be African American, then they're in all 3 groups. So they're represented in each place.
Thank you.
It's a good question.
Okay, and I know this is a mock-up, and we don't have all the answers yet of exactly how this is going to unfold. But when we look at the progress towards long-term goals, and we see the keeping up, catching up, falling off, are we comparing a grade level performance from one year to the next, or are we considering the value added model of progress from that core group of students from one year to the next? So my question is, is this a point in time performance rating for just a particular grade level, or are we considering the actual progress towards a long-term goal for a group of students from year to year?
From the standpoint of what is required under ESSA, the way that these charts were put together is based on different groups of kids. So it's not the cohort. This is against those aspirational goals. The law requires that we set long-term goals and measurements of interim progress. The long-term goals, so there's a section in here that describes the long-term goals, talks about that aspirational piece. And then Appendix A of the draft gives you measurements of interim progress, which we're using the language checkpoints for now. But the checkpoints are every 3 years, not every year. And the idea behind that, and it's written in there, that we understand that these are different kids, and we're trying to spell it out in our response to the U.S. Department of Ed, that the reason that we're reporting on this, we're mindful of this, but this is not what we're using to help us understand who are our most struggling schools that need support, where are our subgroups that really are low performing or consistently underperforming. That part is done with the annual meaningful differentiation, with the index, which incorporates all that type of information. Now, what I could see, that matrix with the bubbles that you were mentioning, that could very easily be a reflection of a cohort within a school. So that's put there to show that some of the most useful information that we can get as an educator at a school or grade level would be information about how my students are achieving and how they're growing. So the power of two, putting those two components together. Because if you, that tiny little example up there, if you broke that into 4 quadrants, I'm going to be most concerned about the students who are low achieving and low growth. And if I have a cohort that continues to show low achievement and low growth, I need to really step up what's going on to help that cohort. So that's an opportunity to present that deeper information. The catching up, keeping up, that's to communicate this is how Arkansas is proposing in this draft. It could change based on feedback and other things. But that's how right now Arkansas is proposing to handle that requirement for the long-term goals. Recognizing that, again, that's achievement, graduation rate, English learner progress. The only one of those 3 that really looks at a cohort is English learner progress. But that doesn't mean that we can't do the other pieces and provide that richer information. As a matter of fact, I believe Dr. Saunders' office is waiting on some data so they can start creating those visuals.
And I think that it's valuable information on both sides. We, as a school, you want to see both of those areas of performance. As a parent, I think you want to see that cohort group. You want to see your own child and their performance from one year to the next.
Right.
But it is valuable information for us to evaluate where we are and make adjustments and also provide additional interventions and support for our students.
So the growth part, we'll look at let's say 6th grade. You'll look at 6th grade every year to do growth, or are we going to look from one year to the next?
Hang on, let me see if I don't know if I put something in here to help explain it. It looks at those 6th graders, so, it's in my longer one that I didn't send because it had too much in it.
Okay.
The growth model takes a student's score history, their entire score history. So it's all about that student and whether or not, based on that student's score history, what we expect them to do and whether or not they achieved that, exceeded that, or didn't meet that. So that the growth model, the value-added growth model that we're using right now, because that's what we can do with 3 test transitions.
Right.
And it actually turns out we got really good affirmation from our critical friends, our statistical peers in that group, that this was probably the wisest course of action, given that we don't have information that ties how students are growing relative to the standards that we're kind of hitting that by putting this information together the way we are. But if I'm a 6th grader, then my score is based on any information that the state has on me. It creates an expectation for me, and then I compare my actual score to that expectation. And then I take that group of 6th graders and I aggregate that growth or I average it at the school level. So it's both. It's both a look at how 6th grade is growing, but it's a look at how these 6th graders grew this year relative to what we would expect of them based on everything else that they've done. So it's like it's not exactly a cohort, but people use that word so differently, but it builds on, in other words, every single student in that 6th grade has a score history that is their comparison. So they become their own, we call it a control.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Okay, Senator English.
So what we're doing is we're keeping records and things on kids and from kindergarten all the way up to the 6th grade, so we know what their history is from beyond, and then we would use those 6th grade going forward.
Yeah, well, so
We
each
have a
year-
history, and we can see where they have had problems and where they have been able to excel and
Exactly. So maybe in first grade, they were a high performer, and in second and third grade, they lost a little bit of ground. That's going to result in a different expectation for fourth grade than if they had been a constant improving student. Oftentimes, I'll just think of some of the classes I've taught. I've had students who just had a really bad year. I've had students who've had a bad year because of family situations, and I've had students who've come to me who've had a bad year because they weren't challenged or they didn't get their needs met in a prior year. If that year is an anomaly, then the way that we calculate growth, that gets adjusted for. So it doesn't, a student who has a bad year isn't permanently put in a bad, like here you go. It adjusts. So every year, how a student does adds to what we expect of them. So it takes that full history. And that's the beauty of it. In this model, we don't account for school level factors. And the reason for that is we really want to know about the student and what this information gives us back, and you'll see it in some of the data that's reflected in the draft. It does help you to understand if a group of students maybe aren't doing what we would expect of them because of school level factors. Because what we're doing with this model is we're taking all the information about the student that's part of their history, their score history, and we're using that to understand what we expect of them. And then what a school adds on to that shows up in the growth score.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Okay.
Proceed.
Let me talk a little bit about the combining of indicators, because this was, as you may remember, although I'm telling you there's so much information that it's hard to remember, and I would definitely understand if you don't, that the advisory team and stakeholder input talked a lot about having a variety of indicators in how we understand school performance. So the school performance rating, which is this index, basically is comprised of at this point, five pieces. Achievement, which we have to have, if you go through the template that the U.S. Department of Ed gave out, they spell out what you have to have, and then states can add in more than what you have to have. So we have to have an achievement measure. We're going to use weighted achievement. Weighted achievement is sensitive to the idea that if you're in the lowest, the close to ready, the ready, or the exceeding performance levels, that you need to keep moving, that you need to keep achieving. That if I'm a student who's ready, I can't just be satisfied with ready. I'm going to be incentivized to move that ready student to exceeding. So what weighted achievement does is it gives partial credit. This is on page 33 of the draft. It gives partial credit for students in the close category, the level 2 of performance. Every time a school moves a student from the lowest performance category into the close category, they are going to gain half a point. So what this does is it, in my mind, if you think about what we did under what we call bubble kids, where the focus was, I got to make safe harbor, I got to get kids over this target, this annual measurable objective, AMO, for AYP in NCLB. I could rap. Sorry. If you think about that, that really focused us narrowly on a small group of kids who were close to the proficient line. What this does is it says, move them all. The more you move, each year, you're going to get credit for moving them all. And so under weighted achievement, if you move kids from the first level into close, the lowest level is called in need of support, you're going to gain half a point for every student that you move up. If you move kids from close to ready, you gain another half a point because that gives you a full point for that student. If you move kids from ready to exceeds, you gain a bonus point, a quarter of a point. The caveat there is you're not going to get the extra credit for exceeds unless you move kids out of the bottom. Because that's the other place, is you can easily compensate for your lowest performers by just focusing on the top. We want to incentivize all kids growing every year. And you can improve your score that way. That's how this works out. And there's an example on page 33 of a chart that is very complicated. Sorry, parents. It's meant more for teachers and leaders to understand kind of how that could be incentivized. So that shows you schools over time and how they could increase their score and how much more robust that is than just percent proficient.
Right.
So that's that figure on page 33. So that's the achievement section. Then we have the growth model that we just talked about, and I've given you the page references, page 36 and 37, and that's the value-added model that we're using. Graduation rate is a requirement. Arkansas, we modeled this with both the 4 and the 5 year, so included those calculations in. English learner progress, this is one that Arkansas right now in the draft has proposed a transitional measurement for English learners' progress to English proficiency, and that's because of test transition. One of the things that we're going to be very mindful of is making sure that as more years of ELPA 21 data are accumulated, that we are looking at whether or not we keep the model that's proposed or move to a model that's more closely tied to English language proficiency. But this is in the same boat that our general achievement is, in that we're in a test transition, and so we're using the same value-added model, but it's based on the students' English language scores, not on their English language arts or math scores. So same model, different set of score histories. So if I have a second grader who has a kindergarten and first grade score, that helps me to understand where I expect them to be in second grade. If I have a sixth grader who's been taking a score or been taking the English language proficiency test since first grade, then I have 5 years of scores to help me understand where to expect them. So our critical friends, our peers who reviewed this, really said that this was probably the best place we could be because of our test transitions and doing something that is statistically appropriate and yet sensitive to the concerns of stakeholders. So that was really good to hear, because this is hard work. And then finally, the school quality and student success indicators. I want to talk more detail. It's on pages 40 and 42. And this gets to some of your question about what does that mean. The ESSA, the statute itself, defines what they don't really define, they just say school quality, student success indicators such as.
I'm not sure what you said.
I know you were just looking for page 40 and 42. It's okay.
I'll put my pen down.
That's my cue to move on right now. This was the hardest one, you guys, because stakeholders had the most to say about that fifth indicator. And rightly so. I think we're all excited at the thought that we would have more information in what we're using for support and accountability. The slight hiccup is that not everything can be done right away, and certainly not for the modeling of the impact of it. And so what we did was we broke it up into 3 groups. We looked at what do we have right now, data that are collected that we could stick in this model so that we could get you information that informs decision making. So that's category A. If we didn't have data, but we had something we thought was a proxy, a similar substitute for what we thought people were looking for, we use that in here. So you can see what that list is up here. And then category B are things that we thought, you know what, the data might, it's either being collected or it's not collected fully. We might be missing an element or two that we need for a calculation, or there just isn't time to do the calculation before the draft. So there are some things in category B that we're actually getting the data and running the calculations of to see. But these are things that might be available to us within the next 2 years. And then category C is a little bit more complicated, because in this, you either need a measurement instrument. So for example, school climate, parent engagement, student engagement. If you were to have a survey, there are a ton of surveys out there. If you wanted to develop your own survey, you have to pilot it, you have to validate it, and then you can start to use it. So that's minimum 3 to 4 year process. If you have a survey that's already out there, then that's a procurement process. That's finding out who are the people that have these surveys, which ones are most aligned to what we think are elements of school climate, parent engagement, and student engagement that are valued in Arkansas. And then we have to look at that data. So that's, 3 years maybe at the most before you could take a finished product, check it for alignment, and go through a procurement process and put that into play. So that's the reason you see 3 categories. And that's the reason you may not see in the modeling everything you want. Because everything we want isn't necessarily available. And I think I did. This chart. This is the chart that most other people don't think about, but people like me get, what's the word? We persevere, or I think the negative connotation of that word is perseverate over it. So these are the criteria in ESSA that we have to apply to the 5th indicator, the school quality or student success indicator. It has to meaningfully differentiate. That means it needs to have a pretty good distribution that shows schools at all ends. It can't all be everybody scores 94%. And that's what attendance rate is. If you look at Arkansas's attendance rate right now, our mean is 94, 95. It's somewhere between 94 and 95. That's our mode. That's our median. It really is. It's amazing how similar everybody's attendance rates are. So it doesn't meaningfully differentiate. So we can't just use the straight attendance rate. And we talked about this with our technical advisory committee, and they gave us some really great ideas, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The other criteria is it must be valid, reliable, and comparable or comparable, depending on where you're from, in the same indicator for a grade span. That's not always easy. You can find things that are valid and reliable, but not comparable. You can find things that are comparable, but not valid and reliable. So meeting that is the other criteria. And then the last one is we have to disaggregate it by student group. So that also becomes a challenge. We looked at 4 proxies that you see up here that we could use right away just for the impact modeling. One was chronic absenteeism. We have schools that have a 94% attendance rate, but they have a high percentage of kids that have chronic absenteeism. So it's really interesting when you look at that data. The data for chronic absenteeism is really differentiating. It's got a really nice distribution. I believe you have that in Appendix D of the draft. Let me tell you a quick page reference. It is on, here it is. That's English learner. Yeah, the whole last few pages, if you just look at the back of your draft, the whole last few pages really give you all the distributions. So chronic absenteeism is on page 138. And you can see that it does distribute. And we, interestingly, on average in the state, let's see, where's my median is at 13, almost 14% of students in a school that are absent 10% or more of the time that they're enrolled in a school. So it's an interesting indicator that can be used. And it actually goes all the way through grade 12, but we heard a lot back about indicators at grade 12 being more about post-secondary readiness, so that's why you see that differently. Middle grade science achievement or growth as that becomes available as a proxy for STEM readiness. Reading at grade level at grade 3 as a proxy for reading readiness. If you look at the goals, if you look at what we want for all students, there are some important milestones along the way that are evidence-based. So if a student is reading on grade level, when they get into grade 3, they're more likely to be successful all the way through. That's why reading readiness for now as a proxy. It'd be really wonderful if we could look at scores at the end of grade 2, but we're in a transition there, and so that's listed as a category B, I think, 5th indicator. And then STEM readiness, we have this, huge need for kids to be ready to tackle some of that information. And right now, the science would provide a really nice measure of that. If you look at what kids are required to do when they take an ACT in 11th grade, If you ever tried to do the science section, has anybody done the practice test for ACT or remember taking the ACT? It's very analytical. It's a lot like the analytical section of the GRE. It's all about, can you analyze the information given and apply it within the context of what they've given you. And that's just a really important skill. And that skill is built tremendously through inquiry-based science approaches, and we're lining up, our standards are lined up for that. So it's a really interesting, nice measure for that. And then the final one here is the percent of graduates. So think about your kids who just graduated 12th grade last year. What percent of them, so we took the graduates table, what percent of those students who graduated from your school completed at least one credit that was an AP class, an IB credit, or a concurrent credit? And the concurrent credit includes the ACE concurrent credits in these calculations for now. This indicator has a lot of potential. The issue that we've run into, you'll see in the modeling data, see if I include, I think I did, let me, I'll show it to you later, but students with disabilities, we just don't see a large number of students with disabilities, and part of that is because many of the students who were receiving services for their learning disability in earlier grades are exited because their discrepancy is gone, and so they're not there, belonging to that subgroup, so we can't include them. So it's not that there aren't students who have learning disabilities who are doing these things. As a parent, I can attest to that. It's that the way that the system works, that data is difficult to collect. So that's something that we're going to be working on, problem solving. You have a question?
Sorry, I was just curious, if we go back to that chart with the criteria for schools who don't meet, let's say the chronic absence or the reading and grade level, do we have support systems in place or ideas that schools can incorporate to help their students, for example, who are not reading and grade level for the next year?
There is a very robust program called Attendance Works. I can't remember who is the person that does Attendance Works. I don't know if it's a government-funded program. I do know that 40 elementary schools across the state through the grade level reading program work with their chronic absenteeism data, get really cool. I got a chance to look at the really cool visual reports that they have, and they're phenomenal. And they're just simple Excel sheets that every school could have and dump their data into and be able to understand where the issues might lie. And then Attendance Works has a whole series of suggested interventions for this. So there are resources out there because this has become a growing, and we'll even see more resources coming because 38 states are looking at this as an indicator. So.
I think, as you were talking about a while ago, this is a cycle of improvement for schools, and so once we see that this is a problem, then that's where it gets addressed in the plan, because the way I understand it, the district is going to make a plan to address the needs that they see as a result of these indicators, and so hopefully, we'll all, everybody can improve, and we'll all work together to, if you've got something that's working at Van Buren and then you want to share it with others, I think as we get into this, we'll start, I hope, doing more sharing of things that are working across the state too.
And that's, I think about that, and I think when you think about this theory of action, that it's the LEA that is really going to help support these struggling schools. One of the ways that I relate to that is that the work that we did when I was at Jefferson, my kids who were chronically absent, I could not have been effective with them without the help of the social workers who helped us track down what was going on. What's the reason for the chronic absence? Can we intervene in that reason in some way to get this child to school more often? And those are things that the district had to give us a higher level of time from the social workers in order for us to get our needs met. And that was not something that at a school level we had as much control over, but our district office did. And so that's where you think about some of these issues, that's where this whole system sets us up for better addressing of concerns that are there. I even remember when we were looking at redistributing kids because we had a school that was closing. We drove through all the neighborhoods in Fayetteville Actually, I drove through all the neighborhoods in Fayetteville with the person who was making those decisions, and we looked at social work burden. And we made sure that the kids who were coming from this one school that had a pretty high social work burden, that they weren't all going to one other school, that burden was being spread out among a number of schools in order to reduce that burden for any single school. So those are the kinds of things that LEAs have the power to do that a single school can't do for themselves unless they've got somebody who's really in their corner trying to help them address a really difficult problem.
Senator Jenkins.
I want to just go back here, the percent of graduates completing at least one credit in AP, and then you said ACE. That could be an industry certification as well as a AP course?
It could be. Those data aren't in here yet because we're still trying to, as you can imagine, if it's not something that you're using regularly in this particular mix, you have to get that information, and then you have to make sure you have that information attached to the kids in a certain way. So we didn't have it readily available in time for this, but we're asking for that information because at this point, we actually looked at the percentage of kids. Right now, we have a good percentage in AP and a good percentage in concurrent credit. Not all districts offer an IB program, but those that do get credit for that in this indicator. The concurrent credits for English and algebra are very high. The ACE concurrent credits are really low, so we're looking to add in more of the career piece. Our critical friends have kind of challenged us and said, you want to make sure that what you do count on the career side represents the rigor of your vision. And so that's part of the work that has to be done in order for us to we can add it in and we can model it, but before we do that, we have to kind of work through what the data is giving us and understand it enough to know if it's at that rigor level.
So I have a fellow legislator who has a son who is just finishing the 11th grade. And his goal is to be the valedictorian of the class next year, his senior year. And he's taken all AP classes, but he told his dad, he said, I want to take a welding course, but if I take that welding course, it won't mean as much as an AP class, and I won't get to be the valedictorian. Well, we can't have that. Yeah. Can't have that. I mean,
yeah, we can't explore pathways if our pathways are determined by.
But I just, when I heard that, I thought, well, but we need to find a way to make all of these things so that kids are successful. Doesn't matter what where they're going. That
yes.
And we've always done AP classes, but if that's not for everybody, and we have to have something else. But I thought, now that kid's in a conundrum because he doesn't know what to do. He knows what he'd like to do, knows what he thinks would be valuable to him, but the way we've set up our system right now, he probably couldn't get to be valedictorian if he takes that one class. We shouldn't have that.
And that's why over time we need to be able to add more of those indicators in to this component of the index, because we may not have them ready right now, but as we grow in our ability to understand how to do a better job of offering students some agency in path, place, time, and pace, path, place, time, and pace. We need to be able to give those options to kids and not have them be, everything has a competing tension, but some either ors need to be more and. I very much understand. Let me take you to, I'm going so much longer, and I can feel Tina's eyes on the back of me.
Can I ask one question before you go on?
Sure.
About your weighted measures where you were giving the half credits. When a student falls backwards, do they have points subtracted?
Points are not, well, let's say that. So if a school, do you have page 33 available to you? I knew it would be the busiest diagram in the world to put on a slide, and I probably should have. But if you look at page 3, there's a table there. And I already overcrowded the space that I had to build this table. I couldn't get it any wider and make it a font size large enough to read. But I want you to imagine It's table 12 on page 33. And if you see those 3 rows of little students, think year 1, year 2, and year 3. So in year 1, I had 5 students who were in need of support. This was the trouble with the bubble thing was that people forgot that they were hedging their bets on what students did in the last year. And in order to score at the ready level the next year, you had to increase your learning. You had to learn. You couldn't just bubble a little bit. You had to really learn a whole grade level. So what this does is, if you look at this, those 3 students in the second row, they might be the same, 3 of the same ones that are there. But it could be that 3 students moved over and 1 student moved back, because now we're at, say it's 6th grade and this person's really struggling with 6th grade reading, and that student falls in need of support. We don't subtract a point, but the fact is that those 3 kids don't have any points assigned to them. So in essence, you've lost, but there's no subtraction for that. It's that you have to count where you have them. So, yeah, we've had a system before that did subtraction, and it had some interesting feedback on it. So, okay, weighting. Now, in this situation, we're talking about how does each indicator count in that overall performance rating? How much does it influence your overall score? That's what we mean by weighting. And in this situation, it looks kind of complicated, but we have an indicator that doesn't fit for every school, and that's the English learner progress. It's required by law, but if you don't meet the minimum N, that indicator isn't part of your school performance rating. So in this weighting, what you see this table right here, what we did was for each grade span, K5, 6-8, and 9-12, we did weights for if you had English learners that met the minimum N, and we did weights without. So that's why there's 2 columns for each grade span. And the commissioner was very responsive to stakeholders and said, I want you to model 50% growth. That's what we heard, let's model it. We saw at least one state that went for 50% growth. And so we did, because if we're gonna value this long-term improvement, we really need to value growth. At the high school level, the reason it's not 50% is because we've got 15% for the graduation rate, which is an important outcome of grades 9 through 12. So what we did was we took each indicator score, multiplied it by the proportion. So the weighted achievement score times 0.30, the growth score times 0.5, the English proficiency progress score times 0.10, and then the school quality indicators as you see. This was for modeling purposes only. And these are the results from that modeling. So if you think about a possible 100 points total, knowing that under weighted achievement, if you move enough kids out of the bottom and into the very top, you can actually get more than 100 points. So that's where the bonus comes in, and that's how we're incentivizing all kids moving, right? What you see here is the types of scores that we would get. And I put the standard deviations in parentheses. That's important because you have to be outside of, I think it's about 1.5 standard deviations to fall in the bottom 5% of the all students group. Almost 2 standard deviations at some grade ranges. So this, from a statistical standpoint, this worked out better than hoped for. Doesn't often happen. I was really excited. And then the peers kind of affirmed that as well, and that was even more of a thrill for us. So if you think about 100 points possible, when we split this out and we looked at what you see right here is the average, the middle for each subgroup, but I can tell you that every subgroup, I want to say every subgroup, I've got to double check it, I think it's in one of my sets of notes, had maximum scores that were over 100. So in some schools, we have African American groups, Hispanic groups, economically disadvantaged, white groups, English learners, and students with disabilities that are earning the bonus, that are getting more than 100 points on the school performance rating for that particular subgroup within the school. So that was really another important piece for us to look at was, does this differentially impact any particular group? And it doesn't. Now, part of that is we've got to resolve the issue at 9 through 12 with the students with disabilities, and we're working on that. But I was really thrilled. Now, English learners, Melissa, this was the option that our critical friends were like, hey, if you wanted to provide for your state an option that would allow for English learner progress to proportionately count based on the number of English learners in the school, this second option for weighting does that. Everybody gets the same weight for growth, but what we end up doing is we take, in this diagram to the right, the top one where it has school VAS, you can see that there are 3 little circles. English language arts is the ELA VAS, math, and ELP is English language progress. So when you put all 3 of those pieces together, you would get one single growth score. So then every school has 50% growth. And what happens is English language progress, for a school that was 100% English learners, the ELP growth would account for 1/3 of the growth component, which means it would account for 17% of the school performance rating. At the converse of that, a school, as you go down in population, so a school with 20% English learners, the English learner progress growth would account for 4.5% of the school performance rating, 9% of the growth component. So what it does, it's like, you know how you can do things on sliding scales? It's like a sliding scale of counting English learners' growth into the growth measure. And that's out there for stakeholders to say, we like option 1 or we like option 2. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. In option 1, doesn't matter if you have a whole school full of English learners or only 20 English learners, it's 10% of your school performance rating. In option 2, it's a sliding scale. So that's that, and I am almost done, unless you have a question.
Just real quick on option 1.
Yes.
If you can go back to that. So
Yes.
if the minimum N is not met for English language learners, what is the overall weighting process then for a school? I missed that.
Okay, so that's, if you look, does this thing, oh, and then it disappears on the TV screen. Okay, so look at weighted achievement for K-5. You see with English learners, weighted achievement is a 30% weight. Without English learners, it's 35. Growth is always 50. So what we did was we took the 10% for English learners, that's in row 2, and we farmed it out, and the 5th indicator counts at 7.5% for each of those, and achievement counts for 5% more. And that makes sense because if you don't meet the minimum N, that challenge and risk and burden is different.
So it's just placed in weighted achievement.
So it's just farmed out, well, weighted achievement and the 5th indicator.
Yes.
Because those are the only 2 places at K-5. And so we just were consistent all the way across the board.
Okay.
Yeah. That was a good question. Okay, we ready? I'm almost done. Yes, I am, because much more detail is embedded in the draft. And I wanted to save time if you did end up having any questions about identification of schools, timelines for identification, exit criteria, and responsive support. So if you think about the entire theory of action, the entire frame for all of this, the idea behind this is that school performance rating that we modeled would provide a score from which we would do identification of schools. And the other part of that when we talked about the impact of the minimum N, we modeled it at 15 and we modeled it at 25. And it's very, very interesting. And part of the reason it's very, very interesting is that we still need to work on that 9 through 12 students with disabilities piece. What we did in the modeling was we said, if you don't meet the minimum N of 15 and you don't have all 5 indicators, then that group does not have a score. So it's a lower minimum N, but it's a lower minimum N, and you have to have all those kids. So in other words, we didn't just say, for the English language group, if you meet it for achievement and you meet it for progress, but you don't meet it for growth and you don't meet it for the additional indicators, we're going to just calculate it on 2 of the 5. We used a decision rule that said, if a group is going to count, a group has to have data for all of the indicators. So that actually worked out really well too, in some ways, because that minimum N of 15 was actually necessary to capture some groups. Until we get the special ed piece in the 9 through 12, until we can, do a little bit extra work on that with some additional data, we don't know the exact impact at the high school level. But as you know, we're going to end up, by meeting the law, we're going to end up somewhere between 42 and 46 Title I schools. That's the 5%. After that, what we have to identify are schools that have a student group that's below the all students school performance rating for that grade span. And again, as I said earlier, that's going to be at least 1.5 to 2 standard deviations below the mean is where that 5th percentile is. So that's actually a pretty good, not only is it a good data marker, it statistically has a good space. It identifies I think the biggest concern we all had about minimum N and impact modeling was, were we going to end up with 600 schools identified for targeted support? That's not going to be the case. It's going to be closer to, it'll be under 300.
Okay.
It'll be under 300 if we did a minimum N of 15, and it'll be under 200, and that could change with adding in the additional group for special ed for the high school, but under 200 with a minimum N of 25. And what you need to think about there is we're identifying for support. We're not identifying to label and shame, we're identifying for support.
Right.
So I leave you with that impact modeling.
That was a question that I had. The other question that I
knew you
had
would.
was the special ed. Is it data that you're going to be able to get, or is it data that we're going to have to put in to be able to get in the future? How does that work?
I think it's I don't know for sure. So we haven't had a chance since it has been, Tina can attest to, there's been not a single moment of time that hasn't been dedicated to getting everything that you see in this draft ready to go for last Monday. So now we can get what we need in place so that hopefully within the next 3 weeks we'll know. There are several things that we hope to be able to run in the next month, by the end of June. And that includes the English language 2017 and 2016 and the cohort changes there. So that is in the works because the data are available, so our group is focused on that. And that's really close to having good information. I think Tricia already has some of that information, may have shared it, I don't know. It's been pretty busy.
I can imagine. Well, thank you.
welcome.
You and your team have done a tremendous job of modeling the data and making it clear. And I know you have spent lots of sleepless nights and long hours, and we really appreciate what you and your team have done. You've done a great job.
Well,
We're very thankful.
Could not have done it without everybody else and all we've had some really incredible help from Battelle for Kids, from Council of Chief State School Officers and the leadership team. It's been a phenomenal, this process has been, although it about kills you, it has been the best process that I've ever been in for this kind of work in Arkansas. So it's very, very exciting, very exciting.
I know our students are going to benefit, and so that's the main thing. That's the main thing. So we're very appreciative of that. Does anybody have another question or comment before we move on? Ms. Smith?
So before we start talking about the plan, I just want to take a few minutes, and I'll second what you said in thanking Denise and her team for all of the data and pulling those things together, because that is an amount of work that's almost incomprehensible. It would have been for me had I not have been in the middle of it, but it has been a lot of work. And there's other parts of the ADE team that have been doing work that you may not have noticed, so I would like to share. If you have been watching every day at noon, you have seen some of our Facebook Live sessions, and if you haven't seen those, you can go on. They're posted on the Facebook page, but I want to share a little bit of, I want to show you what the communications team has done for some promotional things about this draft. A little bit of technical difficulty, and I'm just glad it's not me this time. Okay, so she can show you where the videos that have been done prior to today are posted on the Facebook page. And I think what I really would like for you to get out of this is the fact that we're trying to reach everybody in every way possible. I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and somebody did not know what was going on, and so I asked, how do you get your information? What's the best way for you to get it? And the answer that that particular lady told me was she liked to get hers through commissioner memos. So when the first draft went out, we didn't put it in a commissioner memo. This time we did. So we're trying to use all avenues possible for people to know this is out there. And right before I came up here to talk to you, the survey that's online, right now we only have 7 responses. Now I know it's just been a little bit over 24 hours, but really for us to be able to make sure that this is the plan that's best for all Arkansas students, then we need a variety and a lot of feedback so that we can make meaningful changes. So if you can, help us spread the word that it's out there so that we can get some of that feedback.
I know Dr. Rowlett, just even on the discussion that we had just had on the waiting, the wanting to know about the 2 options. And so we definitely want feedback from administrators, teachers, those that are involved. So get the word out, because it will impact decisions that are going to be made. And so let us know feedback on what you're thinking about the different parts of the draft.
Do we have a, and I know this is 140 pages, and it's really hard for us to design a single page with some of the most important elements.
Coming.
Okay, so we're working
kind of
on
like an executive summary,
yes,
where it's
that
all.
would be fantastic.
Yes, and if you look on the page right now, the best that we can do what we've got right now is you can actually read it in sections. If you want to, if you're only interested in the English learner section, then you can go directly to that section and take the survey on that. And that helps a little bit because it is so long and cumbersome if you're an educator reading it, takes you a long time. And if you're not an educator and you're trying to read it, it's like reading it in a different language. So we do understand that, and we're working on it. We just don't have it yet. What we also don't have, and I just got an email, is it is going to be online in a Spanish version, but it may be a week before we get that translation. And because of that, what we will do is extend the 30-day time period by however many days that it takes us to get that version online, so that they get the full 30 days. We have enough time in our timeline before we submit to be able to do that. So that's something you don't see yet either, but we are working on what you suggested, but that is really difficult to condense this much into meaningful and understandable short But good question.
Yes, very good. Any other questions or comments? Okay. We're going to move on then to our second part in our discussion of the second draft, and we're going to use the same format that we used last time by the different sections. And Anthony and I had Part A. Dr. Arola did an excellent job of summarizing Part A for us, so we appreciate that. So thank you very much. Anthony, did you have anything that you wanted to add to our question you might want to ask?
No, the question I asked earlier kind of
Okay.
was the only one.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. Again, I think she covered several of the questions that I had marked to ask. And this one question, though, goes back to a question that I had last time, and I'm still having the same problem. Is when we move from talking about comprehensive support, targeted support, additional targeted support, we're talking about that, and then all of a sudden we start talking about the directed and coordinated and intensive support. I can't make that transition because it feels like it's a jump, and I didn't understand, I guess, the connection between the two, how the two mesh together. It's Part E. My page numbers are different because I printed this out before you did the final draft. But it's under Part E, under technical assistance. Mine has page 51. I know your pages are different than mine, but I just had trouble making that jump. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I'm not sure who I need to be talking to.
So, are you, the paragraph that says, are you talking about the paragraph at the bottom of, that says based on state statute, ADE is in the process? Are you talking about there?
It says ADE will assign LEAs identified for coordinated, directed, or intensive support, a contact person to broker ADE resources. And then a couple of pages after that, you've got the table where it shows the general, collaborative, coordinated, directive, intensive support. I guess I'm not making the connection between targeted, additional targeted, comprehensive, and then these 5 levels. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. Do you want to answer, or do you want? I can answer in a very simple way. What is trying to be done is connecting what ESSA requires to our state levels of support.
Right.
So I think what I'm hearing from you is we're not doing the best job that we can to make that clear.
Right.
So I'm going to
not
let
making
Mr.
the
Harvey
jump.
work on that. So we need to work on that transition.
And Tina's absolutely correct. Our goal is to try to blend the two systems in together. So the feds have a certain criteria of how we have to identify specific schools.
Right.
And from the federal side, it's at the school level. At our side, it's going to be at the district support level.
Right.
So we have to blend those two processes together.
Right.
That will be done effectively with inside rule on how we establish, how we're going to identify the district LEA for support versus what the federal wants to identify on the school for intervention, if that
Okay.
makes sense. So
Yeah.
it's with inside the rule where that'll become more clarified on how, if you're, and I'm just going to use a hypothetical.
Okay.
Let's say that you are a district that has 5 schools, 3 of those are identified for coordinated, the comprehensive CSI school.
Okay.
That might put you automatically into the coordinated level on the state side for the district.
Okay.
Because you have so many schools that we are going to be involved in highly on reviewing their school improvement plans. So since at that level we review the school improvement plans, it makes sense that we coordinate with the district and we review and approve the district level support plan too. So that, like I said, that's just a hypothetical until we actually get our rules committee together to identify the rules and the mechanism for placing different districts into the different levels of support they'll be receiving from ADE, identifying them for those levels of support, we really can't draw a straight parallel. So when we're looking at on the Fed side, we have to stipulate exactly what we're going to be doing for those individual schools.
Right.
But our crosswalk is we also have a support mechanism from the state legislative side, which we support the districts.
Okay.
So we're tying the two together to show that we're required on the federal side to do X, Y, and Z, but on the state side, we're doing A, B, and C, and there is going to be a reference between the two, and that will be defined from the state side, since we're moving the state over to the federal.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. From the plan, I think it needs a little bit more, maybe clarification, a little bit more information
Sure.
right there to be able
Yeah.
to make the jump.
Yeah, and we can do that. We can do a little bit more, but we don't want to tie ourselves too much with
Right.
inside our application to
Right.
say that we have to do this now because
Right.
because once we put it in the application, it becomes part of our federal plan and becomes tied on the federal side.
That makes
So we don't
sense.
want to tie hands on either side, the state or the federal, if we can keep from it. Keep it as much flexible for not only the state to provide that support, but also the districts to be able to write their support plans and how they're providing their support to the individual schools.
And maybe you could just have a paragraph stating some of the things that you just said, and that would, I think, would help a little bit.
I can work with Dr. Wild and,
Yeah.
and the team on that section.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Very good.
So just as we're thinking about that, it's gone away.
Okay.
But as we're thinking about that, when I'm hearing district and school, if we're looking at a continuation of kids from kindergarten through 12, you have to have the district leading the way, because they're going to be changing schools, and from elementary to middle school to high school, and if you only put one school in charge and said, this is that doesn't get all the kids in all the systems. So it's got to be a district-wide support system. I have a hard time understanding why we do just one school.
I think that's been the whole change of focus statewide, is that we're trying to move from the focus on just the school, moving it to giving the district the responsibility and giving the support at the district level.
Because that's not fair.
Right.
It's not fair to a school to say, I have to solve this problem all by myself.
Right, and so I think that's a change in our total outlook, and realizing that the district is the one that ultimately needs the support from the
Right.
state. So I think that's a great point. Did anyone else? I know some of you probably read through Section A, and Section A and the appendix were so closely aligned, you couldn't hardly read Section A without going to the appendix and reading also. So I know, let's see, Dr. Jeffcoat and Emma, y'all both had Appendix A. Did you have anything you wanted to add to this while we were kind of on this topic?
I really don't. I just want to commend the people that put together all the graphs and charts and the work that's gone into this, because I know it was no small task. There's a lot of information in the appendix, and if you want to spend some time looking at the formulas that are used to generate the outcomes, then they're available here. A lot of great information, but definitely information that you'll spend some time on. Just as we've talked about with the other sections, this is one that you'll spend a little bit of time reviewing and considering to understand where we are. But good job to those who have worked on this.
Yeah. And I would just encourage leaders and administrators in districts to spend some time looking at the 12-year cycle, looking at the 3 years and some of the numbers that are there, and giving us your input, giving us your thoughts and feedback. It's very important at this stage that we get feedback. So I know some of you watch online, so if you haven't already, I encourage you to go and look at the 12-year cycle of review, the 3-year checkpoints, some of the numbers that are there, and give us your feedback on what you're thinking about those. Any other questions or comments about Section A? Okay. Section B and C was Ms. Flowers and Ms. Gill. Ms. Flowers, what comments did you have there?
First of all, I'd like to commend all of those who've assisted in all of this extraordinary work that has been done, and always immediately upon receiving all of this material, I know it's on the department's website, but I always forward it to all of my district people to let them know what's going on. And Ms. Kelly and I conversed earlier, and we had no major concerns with Section B, and Ms. Kelly has done further research in reference to checking with the various co-ops in her area in reference to the services provided for
Okay.
the students. So
Okay.
she might like to expound on those.
Kelly?
Yeah, I do want to thank the co-ops for being very cooperative and listening to my questions and being patient with me, because I had quite a few questions for them because I just didn't understand how some of the migrant things occurred. And so they were very patient, and they answered a lot of my questions. And as far as I can tell, it's very similar to what we're doing now. So there's not a whole lot of differences or changes. So it seems to work pretty well with what we're doing.
Okay. Did either of you have any questions or comments or concerns with anything that you found?
No.
Okay, all right. Any other members have comments about those sections? All right. Section D was Senator English and Ms. Phillips. Senator English, did you have any comments? Okay.
I didn't do my homework.
Okay. That's okay. I bet Ms. Phillips did. Okay, so she is ready.
Yes, I didn't have any questions in regards to Section D, but I did note the changes that had been made, and I think with the students with disabilities, there was a huge section, and it might be a little bit off, I think, because I printed maybe earlier, either page 75 or page 79. I guess, well, that's not where the major start. The major changes were like on page 83, there were about 20 professional development efforts that had been included to address students with disabilities, including the special ed population, to ensure that those students were making we had the opportunities for student success and great instruction. They talked about the co-teaching projects, transition services for students with disabilities who were transitioning from school to adult life. So I think listing those for someone reading the draft, they would very clearly see that all students of our population are being addressed, not just the general ed, not just GT students, but those with special needs. So I thought that was really, really good. But I didn't have any questions that arose from the additions that had been added.
I also was impressed with that they did a really good job of coming back and explaining some of the things that we had questions about last time. So they did a good job there. Any other questions or comments about that section? Okay. Sections E, F, and G. Ms. Bratton, you had them all to yourself.
Okay. Forgive me, I'm working from 3 different documents. I also printed an earlier version, so. Yeah. During the first draft, there was one of the issues that I had brought up that we kind of looked at was from the ELR, the English Learner Referral Form, and it was kind of a clarity issue, and they did address that in the update. Okay. So that's I just wanted to point that out. And there have been some changes and additions since the last draft, and I just kind of wanted to point those out. Not necessarily that I have anything to say or anything to fix, but just to point a couple things out. They did elaborate a little bit more on the statewide the proficiency screener, the ELPA 21 screener, and then kind of gave some projections on when some of that information would come out. They're looking at doing kind of a implementation plan where it's 2017-18 will be the choice of using a legacy screener or ELPA 21 screener, and then pushing it full out in 2018-19, which is good. The other thing that they did was they added a chart for the criteria for initial placement on the new draft. And gotta pull that up. But it gives a little bit more clarity as to what those the initial placement criteria are, which to me for anybody, any onlooker who doesn't have a lot of information about English language learners and how those kids are identified, our students are identified, it gives a little bit more clarity on that, which is really good. I like that. The other thing that I found was that they added some more information. They're added in an actual section on notification of parents. And I do just have, initially reading that, and I actually just saw that this morning. It was an addition that when I printed this out, it wasn't there. But it's really specific to what the notification to parents would be. And of course, we do want some specificity in that, but I challenge that it might be too much. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that is, and I think that's on page 88 of the newer draft. The other thing is exit criteria has changed remarkably since the first draft went out. Instead of having exit criteria being taking into accountability standardized testing scores, that's changed into what they call professional judgment rubric. So they're looking at proficiency with ELPA 21 testing, and then a professional judgment rubric that has not been necessarily solidified on what that looks like, but it'll account for different things that the LPAC committee would be looking at. And so, and that really is the criteria for exit, just the language proficiency and then that rubric, and then along with notifying parents. So that was a big change that's different. As far as section 2, the English language progress and support from the SEA, that there's the formatting issues that we had some questions about, were taken care of. It looks really good. There wasn't any major changes there. And then as far as Title 4 goes, section F, they added, at the point that the last draft came out, there wasn't a lot of information on what that funding would be spent on. And now they've clarified some of the things and really put a lot of detail into some of the things that they're currently funding and will plan on funding. And then with section G, of course, a little bit more clarity on some of the details are broken down in section 2, and it talks about how those subgrants are awarded. I noticed was a little bit more in depth.
Okay.
And that's really all I have.
Okay. So you just want to see a little bit more flexibility with the parent communication?
Right.
Okay. All right. Any other comments from those sections? I know those were sections, I think, last time that were, I think, under construction or different things, and so that they've put a lot of work into those. And so those people that are responsible for that, thank you for your work again. Y'all have done a great job. All right, HI and the appendix. Dr. Jeffcoat and Emma. Emma, you want to tell us what you think about those sections?
So H begins with the section on the McKinley-Vento Act, and I thought that was very thorough and it kind of addressing what is, sorry, I skipped a little bit ahead. That was I, sorry. H begins with the rural and low-income school program. Yeah, that's right. And that sort of, I love that there was more detail added in which is determined by the criteria, so the 20% more or more of children ages 5 to 17. And so I thought that was I know it was a little unclear last month, but I thought that was a very great addition to that section. And on page 110, I just kind of had a question regarding the 5-year proposed cohort graduation rate. Trying to find the part where it said that. Okay, it mentions at the last paragraph, stakeholders indicating a strong preference for adding extended cohort graduation rate to the accountability system. So maybe just a little bit more clarification on whether schools will be, the way in which schools will be given an option to either opt into it, or how they will, are they going to state ahead of time, like our school is going to adopt this model, or is it going to be gradually introduced over, the next 2 or 3 years? So just the way in which whether it will be implemented readily or over a longer period of time.
And the answer is it will be implemented when this whole system is implemented, okay, which will be the 18-19 school year.
Okay, awesome.
Anything else?
Clarification.
Dr. Jeffcoat?
I don't have anything else.
Okay, all right, very good. I know it was a little bit of light reading for, it probably took you about 5 minutes to get through all that, but I appreciate you taking the time to go through and go through and look and find questions and comments, because the more eyes that we can get reading this plan and thinking about how is it going to affect students, how is it going to affect teachers, how is it going to affect schools, how is it going to affect districts, the better our plan will be. And so I encourage you to encourage others to do what you've done. Go through and read this, and take it in small bites and try to look at it. And I hope that this won't be the only time that you as a group will do what we've done today. Go back through it again and look, because this is not something that you can digest, I don't think, in just one time through. And go through and help us do something that I think is going to be great for Arkansas students. So I appreciate what you've done. Any other comments or questions? Before we move on, I would just like to get a little bit of input from Ms. Bratton and maybe Dr. Jeffcoat, because I know this affects y'all. When Dr. Rowe was talking about the 2 weighting options and thinking about how it was affected with schools that had high EL populations and those that didn't, using a sliding scale or not. I just kind of wondered I know you may not have had even time to think about it a lot yet, but just kind of what your initial thoughts about the 2 weighting choices were.
I think it gives some opportunity to think about, regardless of what the situation. I was looking at some of the numbers in schools that have no English learners versus the amount of schools that have 1 or more. And of course, the 1 or more outweigh the one that have less than 5. And so when you're looking at some of Dr. Ola talks about the data, and it's confusing. I'll just say that. It is very confusing. There's a lot. But at least it gives options. And I don't think in either situation it's going to be 100% the best situation for any district, but which one looks the best for the biggest amount of students or in districts, schools. So that's my initial thought.
Okay, all right.
And the only thing I would add is that what we've got to keep in mind is we're talking about this system in a way that is designed to support schools. Yes. And I'm pleased with the progress that we've made. I think that it will make an impact. I think it's going to look different than what we've seen in the past in how we report our performance for schools, and then also how we support those schools. And it could be possible that some schools will be excited about the opportunity to receive that support, and it should be. Yeah. So I think that for this population, it certainly it will be a benefit to many schools across the state.
Okay, all right. Did anyone else have thoughts about the 2 different options? Okay, all right. I was just curious to kind of know what your initial thoughts were. All right, I think we are going then to move on to our next steps and discuss our future meetings. Ms. Smith and I have talked a little bit about the June meeting. I know it falls in dead week, and I'm going to be out of town that week, and I didn't know if others were. And the way our timeline is going to work, Ms. Smith talked to you a little bit about it. This is online through, for sure, June 23rd, and because we're getting it translated into Spanish, probably going to be online till around June 30th, which would be after our next meeting. So really, there may not be a lot for us to discuss new in June. So we were thinking that our next meeting might be July instead of June. What are your thoughts about that?
Do we have an idea when in July?
The last Wednesday in July, which is what, July? I had my calendar out. 26th. July 26th. What are y'all's thoughts about that?
I'm going to be out of town at that time, but I'm fine with everyone convening without me. I think it would be okay.
Okay.
But I would not be available at the end of July.
Okay, so what are your thoughts about meeting in, let's do this first. What are your thoughts about meeting in June? To not meet in June?
I'd like that, to not meet in June.
You like not to meet in June, okay, all right. And so, we were just trying to avoid getting, into the back-to-school time, because I know that's pretty intense. So, we were trying to avoid that. So, are we okay? What our thoughts were maybe meeting in July and then maybe moving to quarterly meetings after that, because the way the timeline is going to work, this initial draft will be online until around the end of June, and then the department will pull that based on the comments and feedback that we get, make changes based on that, and then it will be put back out again, probably not for a full 30 days, but be put back out again so everybody can see what was done with the comments that were made, and then probably somewhere around the last week of July be sent to the governor's office for them to look at what's in the plan. So, we were thinking, the 26th of July, and then maybe move to quarterly after that. So, what are we thoughts there?
So do we need to make a motion to forego our meeting in June?
I think that would be appropriate,
Okay,
yes.
I'd make so move.
Okay, Dr. Jeffcoat, and then Ms. Phillips made the second. All in favor? Okay, all right. And so we'll meet in July, if that's okay with everyone. And then, Ms. Smith, do you need a motion for quarterly meetings? What do you need from us?
I think a motion would be good, and then the only question I have is, I think August is probably way too busy for you guys to meet because of starting school. The submission date is September 18th, so I suppose my question is, are you guys going to be okay with meeting that last week of July and then not meeting again until, say, September or October? I just want to make sure that that's acceptable to you before we move on to the quarterly. But if that's what we do, then yes, I think a motion to do that would be.
So we need some input. Go ahead.
Okay, if we meet at the end of the July, we'd be able to review any comments.
You would be able to see all the comments that were made during this time period where it's posted, and it will actually be more than 30 days, but you'll see those comments, and also you'll see what is actually the final that's going to be sent to the governor's office. So originally, we had thought we could do that mid-July, but based on backing up some other things, we could, on the 26th, if you met, then you could kind of give us your final stamp, and then after that, go to the governor's office. And then there would still be plenty of time for them to have their 30 days and make our submission in September.
Okay.
I know that it's a busy time in August, but this is really important work, and I think that all of us would be able to find time in our schedule to meet again if we felt like that was necessary. If we don't feel like it's necessary, I'm fine with us moving forward. Maybe in July, we could make that determination if in the event we wanted to have an August meeting and a September meeting prior to submission.
We could make it a Zoom meeting where you guys could stay in your own location, and I could set up a Zoom meeting, and we could do it that way. The only thing I'm not exactly sure about, is how we would share that live with people. So I may need to retract that a little bit, since I don't know all the communications things, but that could perhaps be a way that we could do it and save you guys at least your travel time.
Why don't let's do it this way? I think that's a great suggestion. Maybe let's go ahead and set our next meetings in July, and then in July we'll decide if we need to meet in August or keep meeting monthly, or then go to quarterly. We can make that decision later. So since we've decided we're not going to meet in June, our next meeting will be in July, and then we'll decide in July whether we're going to keep meeting monthly or go to quarterlies after that. Does that work? Yep. Would that work for you?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other comments or questions? All right, well, just, again, keep encouraging everyone that you see to go online and read the plan, read the draft, and most importantly, make comments. Comments are what are going to make this better. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your time. And if we are ready, I'm ready for a motion to adjourn.
Madam Chair, I move that we adjourn until our next assigned meeting.
All right. All right, thank you. All in favor? Aye. All right, we are adjourned.